From Inhumanoids ripping its own chest open, to the never-ending story drowning Artax in the swamp of sadness, to the brave little toaster's nightmare clown, we're counting down the 1980s cartoons that traumatized all of us. But don't click away, because one banned episode was so disturbing, it disappeared after a single airing. The Brave Little Toaster, 1987. This small film about a toaster and its friends earns a spot because it looks like a gentle bedtime story and then quietly turns into a horror show. 5 old appliances wait in a locked cabin for a boy who never comes back for them. The movie is frequently called one of the most emotionally and visually disturbing kids' films of the whole decade, and the grown adults who first saw it as children still tend to agree without hesitation. The trauma is not one big moment. It is a slow drip of dread that builds scene by scene until it soaks into you. A clown creeps into the toaster's dreams. A tiny flower wilts and dies alone by a stream. A junkyard waits at the end with a hungry crusher. Each beat teaches a small, heavy lesson about being thrown away, and that steady cruelty is why it unsettled so many children who only wanted a fun cartoon. The nightmare clown sequence is the first blade the film pulls. The toaster drifts off to sleep, and a grinning clown built from red firefighting gear looms up over the bed. It sprays a stream of water that twists in the air and becomes a fork, reaching straight for the toaster's plug. It is dream logic at its cruelest, the exact kind that makes a small child afraid to close their eyes at night. Then comes the junkyard, where broken cars sing a slow, hopeless song about being worthless while a magnetic crane drops them, one by one, into a crusher. The animation refuses to rush, lingering on each set of headlights as they dim and go dark like a pair of closing eyes. You watch machines with real feelings quietly accept their own deaths, and the film never once looks away from the moment they end. The air conditioner has already shown a child exactly where all of this is heading, bolted to a wall and unable to ever leave the house. He works himself into a spiraling rage until he bursts apart in a violent shower of sparks. It is an emotional meltdown that plays out like a death, and for a small viewer, it is the first time a character simply stops existing, with nobody in the film pausing to explain what just happened. The flower is quieter, and somehow that softness makes it worse to sit through. A little blossom catches sight of its own reflection in the toaster's shiny silver side and falls in love, certain it has finally found a friend who will stay. When the toaster is carried away down the hill, the flower droops, curls, and dies of pure loneliness. A whole lesson about heartbreak gets folded into 30 quiet seconds of screen time. The ending asks the toaster to be a hero, and in this film, heroism means sacrifice with a real cost. At the belt feeding the crusher, the toaster hurls its own body into the grinding gears to jam the machine and save its friends from being flattened. Sparks fly, metal screams, and for a long, awful beat, the film deliberately lets you believe the little toaster is truly gone for good. That single-held beat is why the movie sticks in your memory for the rest of your life. It hands a child the heavy idea that saving someone you love might cost you everything you are, then forces them to sit inside that fear before any relief is allowed to arrive. Comfort comes late and grudgingly, and by the time it does, the emotional damage has already been carved in deep. So the horror here is soft, domestic, and dressed in cheerful primary colors, which is precisely what makes it so sneaky and so lasting. But the next entry trades warm kitchen appliances for cold, black, bottomless water. It asks a small boy to stand and watch his best friend sink slowly into the mud, screaming for him to keep fighting while the ground swallows him whole. The Never-Ending Story, 1984. This fantasy adventure belongs on the list for one single scene that an entire generation still cannot talk about without their voice changing. A young hero named Atreyu leads his beloved horse, Artax, through a place called the Swamp of Sadness, where despair itself seems to have real physical weight. It is one of the most cited traumatic scenes in all of 80s childhood memory, and it fits this countdown so perfectly, it almost hurts. The reason it wounds so deeply is that it quietly removes every possible escape route. The swamp does not attack the horse with claws or teeth or fire. It simply drains away his will to live, and the sadness pulls him down into the muck like slow quicksand. There is no villain to fight, and no monster to outrun, only a soft patient sinking that a watching child cannot stop, no matter how hard they wish and beg for it to end. Atreyu stands beside him in the shallow water, gripping the reins with both hands, and begging Artax to keep moving through the mud. His young voice cracks and rises with panic. He tells the horse over and over not to give up, not to let the sadness win, not to leave him here alone, but the horse keeps going under, one terrible inch at a time, until only his head is left above the black surface of the water. The scene refuses to rush or cut away to spare anyone. It holds tight on the horse's dark, gentle eyes as he finally stops struggling and lets the swamp fold over him. For many young viewers, this was the very first time a story ever showed them that love and effort and desperate pleading are not always enough to save someone. That single quiet truth is heavier than any dragon or demon or monster anywhere on this list. The film does not stop twisting the knife there, either. A monstrous black wolf named Gumork stalks the young hero across the ruined, crumbling land, all glowing eyes and yellowed, bared teeth. He speaks in a calm, cruel, almost bored voice about hopelessness, explaining that people who have lost all hope are the easiest of all to control and command. It is a chillingly adult idea slipped without warning into a children's fantasy film. Above all of it hangs the Nothing, a force that is not a creature at all, but a spreading emptiness swallowing the beautiful world of Fantasia piece by piece. There is no body to strike at, no lair to storm, no weakness to find. The threat is erasure itself, the sheer idea that a whole living world can simply be unmade and forgotten, and a small child is asked to sit and genuinely fear that. What makes the film land so hard is how sincerely and seriously it treats its young audience. The whole way through, it never once softens the swamp or waters it down. It never gives Artax a last-minute rescue or a happy misdirection. It trusts children to sit with real, unfixable loss, and in doing exactly that, it becomes one of the most quietly devastating stories of the entire era. Parents who later showed the movie to their own kids often watched those children react exactly as they once had, going dead silent at the swamp and then asking, in a small voice, why the horse had to die. The scene gets passed down like a family heirloom, a shared bruise handed carefully from one generation straight into the next. So this entry teaches that the scariest thing on a screen is not always a monster, but sometimes just the raw feeling of giving up and going under. The next cartoon flips that idea completely on its head. It hands us a monster so grotesque, so genuinely wrong to look at, that the horror comes not from sadness at all, but from a ribcage that swings open like a hungry waiting mouth. Inhumanoids, 1986. This toy-driven series makes the countdown because it aimed a full-blown horror movie straight at children who thought they were just buying a new line of action figures. A team of scientists battles giant monsters that live deep beneath the surface of the earth, and the show never once bothers to make those monsters cute or safe or friendly. It is remembered today as one of the most grotesque cartoons of the entire decade, and that reputation is well earned. The reason it traumatized so many viewers comes down to one creature in particular, a monster named Decompose. He has a rotting, reptile-like head shaped like a dinosaur's bare skull, and every single line of his design screams decay, rot, and death. He is a walking corpse built to sell a children's toy line, which is a sentence that should not exist in a sane world. And yet the show ran him as a main threat week after week. His single worst feature is his chest, and the show loves to use it. Decompose has an open ribcage that swings apart like a cage door to reveal wet red goo inside, and he uses that hollow, rotting body to carry off screaming victims. He does not simply kill people so much as collect them, tucking living human beings into his own decaying frame, like snacks he is saving for later. Then there is the thing he does to the people his skeletal hands manage to touch. Decompose can infect and mutate ordinary humans, twisting and warping them into undead skeletal versions of themselves. The show actually animates this transformation in detail, letting young eyes watch a normal person slowly warp into a hollow-eyed horror. That is textbook body horror, plain and undeniable, aired quietly in an after-school time slot for kids. The rest of the underground world the show builds is not one bit friendlier or safer. The series packs its endless caverns with monsters made of molten magma, black tar, and cold stone, all locked in war in a dark place far below the surface where no help could ever possibly reach. The setting itself feels exactly like being buried alive, and the show leans hard into that trapped, airless, suffocating dread completely on purpose. What genuinely stunned parents at the time was how openly and shamelessly the show borrowed from adult horror films. There was no clear line at all between a monster meant to move a toy off a shelf, and a monster meant to give a child real nightmares. The two were simply the same thing, and the sheer ugliness of those designs is exactly why so many kids remember it, long after the actual toys broke and vanished, because it was so strange and so short-lived. Inhumanoids became a kind of buried, half-erased memory. For a lot of people who grew up with it, adults will hesitantly describe a skeletal creature with a chest that opens up, unsure whether they dreamed the whole thing, only to slowly learn that it was a real Saturday morning cartoon. That fuzzy, uncertain, half-remembered quality makes the show feel even more like a genuine nightmare. The show proves a point that runs quietly through this entire list from top to bottom. In the 1980s, the very same companies selling shiny plastic heroes were also perfectly willing to sell you the monsters. And those monsters were not softened or watered down at all. They were rotting, hungry, and genuinely happy to carry a small child off. Inside the cage of their own bones, Decompose brings the pure, undiluted visual disgust, the deep fear of your own body being twisted and changed against your will. But the next entry hides its horror behind the softest, most innocent, most harmless brand a child could ever imagine. It takes a whole world of pastel ponies and painted rainbows, and it drops a towering red-skinned demon right down into the middle of it. My Little Pony: Rescue at Midnight Castle, 1984. Few things on this entire list shock people quite as much as learning that the gentle, pastel world of My Little Pony actually opened with a genuine demon. This early animated special is the reason the brand belongs here, because before the toys became a lasting symbol of soft, safe, cheerful fun, they starred in a story soaked in real darkness and cruelty. The sheer contrast between the branding and the content is enough to unsettle anyone. The villain of the piece is Turek, a towering red centaur who looks and acts like something pulled straight out of an old, cracked book of demons. He is not a silly, harmless cartoon baddie you laugh at. He is a satanic figure with a booming, echoing voice and a clear plan to plunge the entire land into an eternal, sunless night. Watching him tower over tiny, trembling, frightened ponies felt genuinely and deeply wrong to young viewers. His chosen weapon somehow makes the whole thing worse. Tyrek wields a dark power called the Rainbow of Darkness, and he uses it to enslave the ponies and physically twist them into snarling dragons. The cheerful little creatures that children adored and collected were transformed right there on screen into hulking monsters, forced to pull his black chariot across a ruined, blood-colored sky. It is a pure nightmare about losing yourself completely. The transformation scenes carry a very particular and specific kind of dread with them. A pony is not simply captured and caged. It is remade against its will, its sweet round face stretching and cracking into something fanged, scaled, and full of rage. For a child who owned that exact same toy, sitting at home on a shelf, watching it become a snarling beast under a demon's dark spell blurred the safe line between the toy shelf and the scary screen. Lurking right alongside Tyrek in the shadows is Scorpion, a huge bat-winged ape-like creature who first appears as a monster, stealing ponies away in the dead of night. He swoops down silently out of the darkness, grabs them in his claws, and carries them off, playing directly on the very old and very deep fear of a winged thing snatching you away while you sleep. His looming shadow alone did real and lasting damage to young minds. The special sets all of this cruelty inside a grim, crumbling castle beneath a sky the color of old blood, a world that already looks half swallowed by evil before the heroes even arrive to fight back. There is a constant sinking sense that the darkness is already winning, that the pretty little land is only a few short hours away from being lost in shadow forever. That ticking clock of doom hangs heavy over every single scene. What makes it truly linger in the memory is the deep betrayal of expectation baked into it. Every other pony story that followed would promise friendship, warmth, and light, but this very first outing promised enslavement, forced transformation, and a demon king ruling the night. Kids who came looking for cuteness and comfort were handed a genuine horror fable instead. And that sudden whiplash is precisely why the special stuck so hard. The special stands as a lasting reminder that in this particular era, no brand was ever too soft or too sweet to carry a real scare. If ponies and rainbows could quietly hide a red-skinned demon and a chariot of transformed monsters, then absolutely nothing sitting on the toy shelf was ever truly safe. The bright marketing on the box said gentle, but the screen inside said something very different. Tyrek proves that horror can wear the friendliest, softest colors imaginable and still cut a child straight to the bone. But the next entry does not hide its monster away in some distant fantasy kingdom at all. It puts the monster right where you actually sleep every night, reaching a long clawed hand out of the one place every child already quietly feared, the dark closet in the corner of the bedroom. The real Ghostbusters, 1986. This cartoon spun directly off a hit comedy movie, so almost everyone tuning in expected easy jokes, goofy ghosts, and plenty of green slime. Instead, its early seasons quietly delivered genuine skin-crawling horror, which is exactly why it lands on this countdown. The writers clearly understood real, primal fear, and they aimed it straight at the youngest members of the audience, right there in their own dark bedrooms. The one episode that scarred the most children is called The Boogeyman Cometh, and it fits the title of this entire list without any argument at all. It takes the single oldest childhood fear there is, the monster hiding in the dark, and makes it terrifyingly, undeniably real. The show treats the bedroom closet not as a setup for a joke, but as a genuine door leading straight to somewhere evil. The boogeyman himself is a full nightmare given a body and a face. He is a tall demon with a huge, misshapen goblin head and long, grasping fingers, and he claws his way out of children's wardrobes to loom silently over their beds. His voice is low, patient, and gloating, and he clearly enjoys the fear he causes, which makes him feel far less like a cartoon villain and much more like a true, hungry predator hunting kids. What made the episode so brutally effective is that it confirmed the exact thing every single child already secretly believed in their heart. The monster in the closet is real. It does come out at night when the lights go off, and it is watching you while you try to sleep. Grown adults today still name this one episode as the direct source of a lifelong fear of the dark and closed closet doors. The show did not stop at just one demon either, and that is part of its dark reputation. Its Sandman stories took another safe and comforting idea, the gentle bringer of sleep, and twisted it into something that trapped its victims in an endless, helpless, dreamless slumber. The message underneath was clear and genuinely cruel. Even sleep itself, the one reliable escape a scared child has left, could be turned into a prison by the things lurking in this world. The animation leaned hard into deep shadow and strange, tilted angles during these horror scenes, making familiar bedrooms suddenly feel wrong, unsafe, and hostile. A closet door left just slightly open, a shape hunched in the corner, a soft sound in the dark. The show learned to weaponize every last one of them. It quietly taught a generation of kids to fear the ordinary furniture standing in their own rooms. Part of the horror was simply how confidently and fully the series committed to it without blinking. There was no wink to the camera, no reassuring nudge to say it was only pretending to be scary. The boogeyman was a real threat the heroes genuinely had to face and stop, and his defeat did nothing at all to erase the burned-in image of that goblin head slowly rising out of the wardrobe. That picture stayed fixed in place for years. This is the cartoon that turned bedtime itself into a nightly battlefield for its young viewers. It reached in and found the specific fear that already lived quietly in every child, and it gave that fear a face, a gloating voice, and a permanent home in the corner closet. For a show born out of a lighthearted comedy, that is a remarkable and genuinely lasting cruelty. The boogeyman built his terror out of a real and familiar place, the corner of your own bedroom. But the next entry builds its terror out of a place that should not exist anywhere at all. It is a strange, obscure imported film where cruel and jealous gods punish the innocent for sport, and where a villain grinds living, breathing people into the bricks of his rising tower. Unico, early 1980s. This obscure imported film earns its place by being one of the strangest and most quietly disturbing things ever aimed at young children. A movie so genuinely odd that many adults are no longer sure it was ever real. It follows a small, sweet little unicorn creature through a series of nightmarish worlds, ruled over by cruel, petty, and jealous gods. The pure gentleness of the little hero only makes the cruelty surrounding him land that much harder. The reason it fits this countdown is its casual, dreamlike, ever-present sense of horror. Unico is cursed by the gods for the simple crime of making others around him happy, and he is torn away from everyone he loves again and again and again. The film treats deep, aching loss as a normal, repeating, everyday event, quietly teaching a watching child that happiness is fragile and can be ripped away on nothing more than a god's cruel whim. Its single most infamous image is a villain who builds a great tower entirely out of living people, turning human beings themselves into the bricks in a rising wall. That one idea alone, actual bodies used as building material, is pure and undiluted body horror, and it appears in what was quietly sold as a sweet little story about a friendly unicorn. The sheer wrongness of that image is exactly what people can never manage to forget. The film is absolutely filled with figures that feel pulled straight out of a genuine fever dream. There is a deranged, deeply unsettling puppet, and a strange hybrid creature that blends a unicorn and a cat together into something that simply does not sit right in the mind. The designs look soft and cute right on the surface, but there is always something quietly off underneath every one of them. A hidden menace that a child can sense but not name. What truly sets Unico apart from everything around it is its logic, or rather its total lack of any. Events shift and lurch the way they only do in real dreams, with harsh punishments arriving for no fair reason at all, and fresh horrors appearing without a single word of warning. A child watching cannot predict what is safe or what is coming next, so the whole film hums with a low, constant crawling unease. Nothing at all can be trusted to stay kind. Because it came from overseas and rarely ever aired, Unico slipped into a great many childhoods almost entirely by accident, on a stray tape, or during a quiet, unsupervised afternoon slot. That very randomness is a real part of its strange legend. People simply stumbled into it, absorbed all of its horrors whole, and then spent long years afterward quietly wondering whether they had somehow imagined the entire thing. The film's genuine, careful beauty is exactly what makes its cruelty bite down so hard. It is animated with real tenderness and craft. So when a god suddenly turns spiteful or a tower of screaming people rises into the sky, the surrounding softness makes the shock cut that much deeper. It lulls you gently with sweetness and warmth, and then it calmly shows you something you will never be able to unsee again. Unico stands as living proof that childhood trauma did not only come pouring out of the big famous studios and the major toy lines everyone knew. Sometimes it arrived quietly from a strange forgotten corner of the world, wrapped up in the cutest possible package, hiding cruel gods and towers of the damned inside a gentle story about a little unicorn. This entry haunts a viewer through pure, uncanny strangeness, the specific horror of a world that follows no rules a child can learn. The next cartoon comes from the most trusted name in all of animation, the Disney studio itself, but do not let your guard down for a second. Hidden inside a charming little mystery is a peg-legged bat with a twisted, crumpled face and a desperate chase through the crushing gears of a giant clock. The Great Mouse Detective, 1986. Disney put this clever little mouse mystery in theaters, fully expecting to delight families, yet it left a surprising number of children genuinely shaking in their seats, which is exactly why it makes the list. Underneath all the charm and wit sits a villain and a henchman built specifically to terrify. The film moves along like a fun little adventure, then keeps ambushing its young audience with flashes of real, sharp menace. The main reason it belongs here has a name, and that name is Fidget. He is a peg-legged bat with a crumpled, snaggle-toothed face, one broken and dragging wing, and a sinister, wheezing, rattling presence that fills every scene he enters. He appears suddenly out of the shadows, snatches his victims, and vanishes again. And for countless kids, he simply became the single scariest thing in any Disney film of the decade. Fidget does all of the villain's dirtiest and most frightening work, and the film very often frames him half hidden in deep darkness. So a child senses him lurking before they ever actually see him. That slow reveal, the crooked, leering face lurching forward into the light, hit young viewers exactly like a jump scare. Many grown adults still flinch at the sight of bats today, and trace that fear straight back to this one crooked, wheezing cartoon creature. The villain pulling all of Fidget's strings is Ratigan, a large, elegant, well-dressed rat with a smooth and cheerful manner that can snap into pure screaming rage without any warning at all. He is charming and gracious in one moment and genuinely murderous in the very next, and that wild unpredictability is its own distinct kind of scary. A watching child never knows which version they are about to get. The smiling gentleman host or the snarling red-eyed beast underneath. Ratigan's deep cruelty is not merely hinted at around the edges, it is shown plainly and directly. He keeps a fat, purring house cat named Felicia, specifically to devour anyone who dares to displease or disappoint him, and the film lets a child fully understand exactly what quietly happens to those unlucky victims. It calmly teaches that this smiling, charming villain feeds his own loyal friends to a monster, which is a genuinely dark idea tucked inside a bright family film. The story then races headlong toward one of the most intense and nerve-shredding finales Disney had ever animated up to that point. The hero and Ratigan battle each other inside the massive turning gears of the Great Clock Tower of Big Ben, surrounded on all sides by grinding metal teeth that could crush them into nothing at any single second. The setting alone turns a simple chase into a raw, white-knuckle fight for survival. That climax works so well because the danger in it feels genuinely, physically real. The huge iron cogs turn slowly and heavily all around the tiny characters, and one small slip means being ground apart by the unfeeling machine. The film drops its miniature heroes right among these enormous, moving blades, and the sheer scale of it makes a child feel small, fragile, breakable, and truly at risk of dying. For a Disney film aimed squarely at families, the whole thing runs surprisingly and consistently dark from start to finish. It offers up a lovable, charming villain who is perfectly happy to feed people to a cat, a wheezing henchman with a genuine nightmare of a face, and a finale set entirely inside a machine built to crush and grind. The polished charm sitting on the surface only made the frights waiting underneath more surprising and more memorable. The Great Mouse Detective quietly proves that even the friendliest and most trusted studio kept a real monster or two tucked away in its back pocket. But the next entry drops the clever mystery and the gentle humor entirely and without apology. It wanders out onto a windswept, empty fog-covered moor, where a great burning Red Bull relentlessly hunts the very last unicorns and drives them screaming into the crashing gray sea. The Last Unicorn, 1982. This strange dreamlike fantasy makes the countdown because it wraps genuine, creeping dread inside gorgeous, gentle storybook imagery, and that exact mix is what quietly unsettles the people who watch it. It follows a single lonely unicorn on a long and sad quest, but the whole world she travels through is thick with atmospheric horror and quiet aching despair. The soft beauty of the animation only serves to sharpen the fear hiding just beneath its surface. The main source of the terror is the Red Bull, a huge flaming beast made of living shadow and fire that hunts down unicorns for a bitter and lonely old king. It does not speak reason or hesitate for a moment. It simply chases an unstoppable force of pure animal menace that drives every last unicorn in the world into the sea. The very idea of a whole beautiful species being hunted to the water's edge is deeply and genuinely upsetting to sit through. That fear is exactly what ties the film so tightly to this list. The story is really about the terror of extinction, of something rare, gentle, and lovely being erased completely from the world by a mindless, burning monster. Watching the unicorn swept helplessly into the churning waves teaches a child that beauty itself can be hunted, cornered, and destroyed, and that the things doing the hunting do not always feel a single thing about it. The horrors in the film do not begin and end with the burning bull either. Early in her journey, the unicorn is captured and caged by Mommy Fortuna, a witch who runs a grim, shabby traveling carnival full of caged monsters and cruel, deceiving illusions. She uses her dark magic to make ordinary frightened animals look like legendary beasts, trapping them behind iron bars for gawking, paying crowds. It is a genuine nightmare of captivity dressed up and sold as a cheerful little sideshow. Locked inside that same carnival lurks the Harpy, a real and monstrous creature with a woman's furious face and enormous, ragged, beating wings. Kept in a cage, she strains and pulls against night and day. She radiates an ancient, patient, seething rage from behind the bars, and the film makes it painfully clear that when she finally does break free, her revenge is going to be swift and brutal. That sense of a caged horror about to explode is almost unbearable to sit with. When the Harpy does finally tear herself loose, The film does not blink or soften the moment for the children watching. She turns on her cruel captor with savage, screaming fury, and the story lets a young viewer fully understand exactly what happens next. It is a raw and lasting lesson that cruelty eventually invites a terrible reckoning, and that some monsters, once they are finally freed, show absolutely no mercy at all to anyone. Hanging over every part of the film is a heavy mood of loss that never quite fully lifts from the screen. The characters ache with deep loneliness. Time steals precious things that can never be returned, and even the happiest moments carry a long, cold shadow behind them. The film genuinely trusts children to feel real adult sorrow, and it never once rushes in to comfort them quickly out of that feeling. That quiet willingness to sit inside sadness and dread is exactly what makes The Last Unicorn linger in the mind for so long afterward. It is never loud, jumpy, or gory the way other frightening films are. Instead, it is deeply haunting, a slow, spreading ache of beauty under threat, of monsters straining in cages, and of a lovely, gentle thing hunted steadily toward the crashing waves. By fire and shadow, this entry haunts with mood and menace, out on a lonely open moor. The next one traps its young victims in a place they can never possibly leave. It pulls a group of ordinary children onto a fantasy ride and strands them in a hostile, hungry world where an evil horned wizard and a many-headed dragon work together. To make certain the way home stays forever out of reach, Dungeons & Dragons 1983 to 1985. This series makes the list for a premise that sounds like a harmless fun adventure and quietly functions as pure, sustained horror underneath. A group of ordinary kids climb aboard an amusement park roller coaster and are yanked without warning into a dangerous fantasy realm, and the true buried fear of the show is that they can never find their way back home again. Every single episode is really a small child's deepest nightmare of being lost forever with no way back. That trapped, stranded feeling is exactly why the show fits this countdown so well. The series dangles a real route home in front of the children in nearly every episode, then cruelly snatches it away at the very last second, leaving them stranded all over again. It taught its young viewers the sharp, specific terror of being separated from your family, with no promise at all of ever returning. Hope arrives each week only to be crushed flat before the credits roll. The realm the children wander through is stalked constantly by Venger, a horned, one-eyed wizard who looks like a proper demon and rides through the darkened sky, spreading fear wherever he goes. He is relentless, patient, and genuinely evil, and his design, all sharp black horns and cold, dead menace, made him feel far less like a Saturday morning cartoon foe and much more like something crawling out of a real nightmare a child might actually have. Looming above and behind even Venger himself is Tiamat, a colossal dragon with 5 separate snarling heads, each one breathing out a different form of fiery destruction. When she finally appears on screen, the whole tone of the show shifts hard into dread, because the young heroes cannot ever hope to beat her, only barely survive her. The sight of that many roaring, snapping heads bearing down at once on a group of tiny, defenseless children is built from the ground up to overwhelm. The world these lost kids are forced to wander is filled with genuine, classic horror imagery too, not just fantasy adventure. The show sent them stumbling through swamps crawling with rotting zombies, past shrieking plant monsters, and up against marching armies of skeleton warriors. These were not gentle, cartoonish obstacles at all. They were the raw stuff of campfire ghost stories, dropped without apology into an after-school time slot for children. There was also a strange, real-world shadow hanging over the entire series while it aired. It came out during a wave of public panic that treated fantasy games and their imagery as something genuinely dark and dangerous, and that fearful cultural mood quietly bled into how the show was seen and felt. The whole setting felt somehow charged and forbidden, as if the darkness playing out on screen might somehow reach out and touch a child's own real life. What gives the show its lasting sting even now is its stubborn refusal to ever grant an easy, comforting ending. The children stay lost. The path home keeps closing in their faces. The overall feeling the series leaves behind is one of being trapped in a hostile, hungry place, far from any safety, with monsters waiting at every turn and no real guarantee of rescue ever coming. That open-ended, unresolved dread is heavier than any single scare could ever be. Dungeons & Dragons took the safest, happiest thing a child could imagine, a bright trip to an amusement park, and quietly turned it into a doorway leading straight into a world of permanent danger and loss. For a whole generation, it planted the low, nagging fear that a simple fun ride might one day strand you somewhere you could never, ever come back from. This entry frightens with the pure idea of never getting back home again. The next one strips away all the fantasy comfort entirely and roots its horror in something painfully, coldly real. It follows two frightened dogs fleeing a laboratory across a bleak gray land, and it stubbornly refuses to promise them, or you, even a single flicker of hope. The Plague Dogs, 1982. This film earns a hard place on the list as possibly the single bleakest animated story ever put in front of young, unprepared eyes. It follows two dogs who manage to escape from a cruel research laboratory, and from that first moment onward, it offers almost no comfort, no hope, and no relief of any kind. It is regularly named in serious discussions of the medium as one of the darkest works in all of animation, and that grim reputation is completely deserved. It fits this list because it treats children exactly like adults, and it does so without a hint of gentleness. There are no cute comic sidekicks to lighten the crushing mood, and no soft promise anywhere that things will somehow turn out fine in the end. The film shows the raw, casual cruelty of animal experimentation and the desperate, exhausting struggle to simply survive, and it never once flinches away from real suffering or looks politely away. The two dogs begin their story already broken and haunted by the lab, one of them still bearing a fresh wound from being used over and over again in cruel drowning tests. That single quiet detail sets the tone for everything that follows. This is a world where the very animals a child would instinctively want to protect are hurt on purpose, coldly and methodically by calm people in white coats. And the film asks its audience to sit and stay with that awful reality. Once they are finally free of the cages, the dogs do not find safety or kindness waiting for them, only new and different dangers. They are hunted relentlessly across a cold, gray, unforgiving landscape by humans who wrongly believe the animals carry a deadly disease. So the very people who might have helped them instead want them shot dead. Every hopeful step the dogs take towards safety leads only to another closed door, another raised gun, and another good reason to keep running. The animation itself matches the grim, hopeless story with muted, drained colors, endless overcast skies, and a heavy, quiet, pressing sadness sitting in every single frame. There is no bright fantasy world to escape into here. Only wet green fields, harsh biting weather, and the small, tired, frightened shapes of two hunted animals. The very look and texture of the film alone quietly tells a watching child that comfort and rescue are simply not coming. What shakes viewers the most, even years later, is the film's total honesty about despair and hopelessness. It lets the two dogs feel genuinely confused, exhausted, and beaten down, and it refuses to lie to them or to the audience about their chances. It shows a world that can be truly, deeply heartless, where mere survival is a long, painful, uphill struggle with no guarantee whatsoever of a happy ending waiting at the finish. Because it is so relentlessly, unbroken sad from start to end, the film quietly became a kind of legend among the people who happened to see it far too young. It is absolutely not a movie anyone rewatches for fun or comfort. It is one they remember instead with a strange, stunned sort of respect, genuinely amazed that something this heavy and this hopeless was ever shown to children at all. The Plague Dogs stands as the extreme far edge of this entire list, the exact point where a kid's adjacent cartoon quietly becomes a raw, unflinching meditation on cruelty, fear, and survival. It trusted children to face the very darkest truths about the world head-on, and a great many of them simply were not ready for just how deep and cold that darkness truly went. This entry wounds with bleak, grown-up, unbroken despair. The next one pulls hard back toward a warmer, cuter, more colorful surface, a story about a brave little immigrant mouse. But do not be fooled for a moment. It opens with a whole village burning to the ground, a family violently torn apart by a raging storm, and a small, terrified child left utterly and completely alone. An American Tale, 1986. This film about a young mouse immigrant makes the list by carefully wrapping heavy adult fears inside an adorable, appealing package. Little Fievel and his family flee their burning home for a distant new land, and the whole story is built on a foundation of loss, separation, and constant grinding peril. Its outward cuteness is really a thin mask laid over some of the most genuinely anxious moments in all of 80s animation. The trauma in it begins almost immediately, which is a big part of why it fits this countdown so well. In the opening minutes, a pack of vicious cats storms Fievel's little village, smashing homes to splinters and scattering terrified families as fire spreads through the streets. Right away, the film firmly establishes that this world is dangerous, that safety can be destroyed in a single instant, and that even a warm, loving home offers no real protection at all. The one scene that scarred the most children comes very soon after that. During a violent, howling storm out at sea, Fievel is swept right off the crowded ship and separated from his entire family, lost alone in the crashing black waves as they sail helplessly on without him. For a small viewer, being torn away from your parents and left completely alone in a storm is one of the very deepest fears there is, and the film shows every terrible second of it. What follows that separation is a long, aching, drawn-out stretch where a tiny child is utterly alone in a strange, overwhelming, enormous place. Fievel wanders a huge and indifferent new city, searching endlessly for a family that has come to believe he drowned and is gone. The film pointedly does not rush his reunion or offer quick relief. It lets him, and the audience right alongside him, feel every single lonely, frightened, exhausting step of that desperate search, stretching the anxiety to its breaking point. The dangers he meets along the way are real, sharp, and frightening for a child to watch. He is threatened, tricked, lied to, and very nearly sold off into forced labor, slowly learning that this glittering new world is full of people perfectly happy to prey on a small, lost child. The story pulls no punches at all about how cruel and predatory strangers can truly be, quietly teaching that being alone and small makes you a target for the very worst kind of people. The film also builds steadily toward a genuinely intense and overwhelming set piece involving a giant, fire-breathing mechanical contraption called the Giant Mouse of Minsk, wheeled out to frighten off the cats for good. The scene is loud, chaotic, and lit entirely by roaring flame, a fiery, thunderous climax that overwhelmed young audiences with its sheer scale, noise, and danger all at once. Running quietly underneath all of the action is a steady, aching current of sadness about leaving home and losing the people you love the most. The film never once lets the peril feel weightless or fun. Every single chase and every scary moment is tied directly back to the real human ache of a family torn brutally apart, and a small child left desperate to somehow become whole and safe again. An American Tale proved that a movie could be cute, colorful, warm, and genuinely beloved, while still quietly filling a child to the brim with dread about storms, strangers, fire, and separation. Its very charm and appeal are exactly what let all of those deep fears slip in so easily and stay lodged there for so long. This entry frightens with the raw terror of being small and lost in a vast, hostile world. The next one leaves the human scale behind entirely and without warning. It carefully builds a dying, decaying, rotting land ruled over by hunched, vulture-like creatures who keep themselves alive by draining the living essence straight out of everyone weaker than they are. The Dark Crystal, 1982. This ambitious fantasy film makes the countdown because it built an entire world out of decay, cruelty, and dread, and then calmly asked children to live inside that world for a full 90 minutes. There is no bright, safe, welcoming kingdom to be found anywhere in it. From its very first frame, it presents a dying land ruled by grotesque, life-draining monsters, and it never once lets the young viewer fully relax or feel safe. It fits this list squarely because its villains are pure, distilled nightmare fuel from head to toe. The Skeksis are tall, hunched, robed creatures that look like rotting vultures, crossed with cruel, greedy emperors, all cracked beaks, ragged feathers, and hungry, darting eyes. They shriek, they squabble, they feast, and every twitching movement they make suggests something diseased, ancient, and deeply wrong. Their very design is built from the ground up to disturb anyone watching. The very worst thing they do is what truly and firmly ties them to this title. The Skeksis keep themselves young, strong, and powerful by draining the living essence straight out of their helpless captives, leaving those victims behind as hollow, empty, shambling shells of who they once were. Watching a creature strapped down and slowly emptied of its very life force is a genuine horror concept that most films made for adults would hesitate to ever show so plainly. The heroes of the story offer a child very little relief or comfort because they are small, gentle, fragile beings called gelflings, hunted endlessly through a hostile world where nearly everything alive wants them dead. The film keeps them locked in near constant danger, sending them fleeing across ruined lands and creeping past lurking horrors. There is rarely a single quiet moment where a watching child can feel that the good characters are actually truly safe from harm. Part of what makes the entire film so deeply and specifically unsettling is simply how real all of it looks and moves. Every single creature on screen is a physical hand-built puppet, richly textured and breathing, with real weight, real slime, and endless fine detail. There are no soft, clean cartoon lines anywhere to gently remind a nervous child that it is only a harmless drawing. The monsters feel like they genuinely exist and breathe, and that solid physical reality makes their menace far, far harder to shake off afterward. The world building only deepens the crawling dread at every single turn. Skittering, chittering, insect-like servants scuttle endlessly through dark stone halls. Strange and cruel rituals unfold in shadowy hidden chambers, and the whole planet itself feels sick, poisoned, and drifting toward death. The film fully immerses its young audience in a place that is beautiful and repulsive at the very same time, a place that seems to hum quietly with slow, spreading rot. There is real, genuine tension in whether the dying world can ever actually be healed at all. And the film works hard to make that final outcome feel truly uncertain. Right up to the end, it refuses to hand out any easy reassurance to the children watching. It lets the darkness feel genuinely powerful and lets the small heroes feel badly outmatched, so that every tiny victory feels hard-won and every fresh threat feels completely earned. The Dark Crystal became a lasting piece of childhood fear, precisely because it flatly refused to ever look away from ugliness, decay, and death. It offered wonder and horror in the very same breath, and for a great many young viewers, the horror is the part that stayed and settled in the exact shape of a shrieking vulture emperor, slowly draining a helpless life away. This entry disturbs with rot, cruel ritual, and lifelike monsters you can almost smell through the screen. The next one takes a hard, sudden turn into comedy, or at least it seems to, before ambushing its unsuspecting audience, with a single face so warped, so sudden, and so wrong, that it became one of the most infamous jump scares in all of film history. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, 1985. This one lands on the list as a genuine ambush, plain and simple. It looks for almost its entire length like a silly, bright, colorful comedy about a grown man chasing his stolen bicycle across the country. Then, without a whisper of warning, it delivers a single moment of pure horror, so sudden and strange that it seared itself permanently into an entire generation's memory. The whiplash between the two tones is the whole entire point. It fits this countdown squarely because of Large Marge. Pee-wee hitches a late-night ride with a seemingly friendly truck driver who tells him a spooky little story, and right at the tale's climax, her ordinary face suddenly twists and stretches into a horrifying warped grimace, rendered in a jarring burst of stop-motion animation. The eyes bulge out impossibly far, the jaw drops and stretches, and it all happens in one single instant, giving a child no time whatsoever to brace for it. The reason it worked so brutally well on so many kids is that absolutely nothing in the film warned them it was coming. The movie had been light, goofy, and safe for so long that the sudden ugly claymation face felt like a genuine betrayal, a real scare that leapt straight out of a harmless comedy with zero setup or warning. That is the very purest and most effective form of a jump scare, and it caught a generation of children completely undefended in the middle of what had felt like a safe, silly movie. The horror in that moment also plays directly on a very real childhood fear. The deep unease around hitchhiking and around climbing into a stranger's dark vehicle at night. Large Marge picks Pee-wee up alone on a black, empty road, and her sudden ghostly reveal turns that entire ordinary ride into something haunted, wrong, and unsettling. It quietly taught a whole generation of kids to be a little afraid of the open road. the dark, and the strangers who travel it after nightfall. The film has other odd, dreamlike frights tucked away throughout its runtime as well, not just the one famous face. There is a full clown nightmare sequence where Pee-wee imagines his beloved missing bicycle being torn apart in a surreal, hellish operating room packed with grinning, leering clown surgeons. It is a sudden burst of pure, undiluted dream horror, dropped right into the middle of an otherwise sunny and cheerful adventure film. That clown scene taps directly into the exact same primal fear that runs quietly through so many other entries on this very list. The deep and specific unease children feel around clowns and their painted, frozen, unmoving smiles. The film renders it all in warped, exaggerated, looming shapes, making the clown's tower and leer down at the viewer, turning what should be a simple bad dream into something genuinely upsetting and hard to watch. What makes these scattered scares so lasting and so memorable is the sharp contrast of everything around them. Because the movie is otherwise so relentlessly bright, warm, and funny, the sudden dark moments hit like a splash of freezing cold water to the face. The film carefully lulls you into laughing and relaxing, then flashes something monstrous and wrong, and that jarring sudden shift is exactly why the images stuck around in people's heads for entire decades afterward. Pee-wee's Big Adventure quietly proved that real lasting trauma did not need a whole dark film wrapped around it to take firm hold of a child. Sometimes a single frame, one warped and stretching face flashed on screen for barely a second, was more than enough to genuinely haunt a person for the rest of their life. It is the jump scare that a whole generation of kids never once saw coming. This entry frightens with one sudden, unforgettable, warping face. The next one returns squarely to the world of animated films and to a true master of childhood dread, opening on a shadowy farmhouse where a giant monstrous owl waits patiently in the dark and a hidden laboratory full of terrible secrets lies festering just beneath the peaceful surface. The Secret of Nim H 1982. This film makes the list as the work that quietly announced a darker new era of animation had arrived. It was the very first feature from Don Bluth, an animator who left the Disney studio in search of the freedom to make something richer, deeper, and far more frightening. What he made was a beautiful, shadow-soaked film that treated its young audience to genuine terror and real life or death stakes without any apology. It fits this countdown because it carefully hides genuine horror inside a small story about a mother mouse. The animation itself is lush, warm, and detailed, but the mood hanging over it is thick with menace, danger, and creeping dread. Bluth filled the screen with deep living shadows and constantly looming threats, crafting a world where a small, frightened mother mouse must face down things that were designed very deliberately to frighten children. The most famous scare in the film is the Great Owl, a giant, ancient predator. The heroine is forced to visit inside a pitch-black, hollowed-out tree. He emerges slowly from the total darkness with two glowing eyes and a deep, rumbling, patient voice, and the entire scene is drenched in almost unbearable suspense. For countless kids, the Great Owl was so genuinely frightening that they became afraid of owls and dark, enclosed spaces for a long time afterward. The slow approach to the owl's lair is honestly a masterclass in building pure dread. Fat spiders crawl across the narrow path, the ancient tree groans and creaks overhead, and the darkness all around feels genuinely alive and hungry. By the time the Great Owl finally speaks aloud, a watching child is already fully braced for the very worst thing imaginable. The film clearly understood that the fear of what might be coming can be even sharper and crueler than the actual monster itself. Beneath the surface fantasy runs a genuinely disturbing and quietly horrifying subplot about the cold laboratory that gives the whole film its name. It slowly and deliberately reveals that a group of rats and mice were used in cruel, painful scientific experiments, injected and tested and altered until they were changed forever. This idea of small animals being twisted and remade by cold, faceless, unseen scientists gives the entire film a queasy, uneasy, real-world horror. The danger throughout stays physical, immediate, and constant for the small characters. There are desperate, narrow escapes, a rat torn apart by rivalry and violent betrayal, and a climax where an entire home is nearly lost forever in rising mud and water. As heavy machines close in from all sides, the film keeps its tiny heroes in constant, believable, breathless peril, so the knot of tension in a child's stomach rarely gets a chance to loosen for long. What genuinely sets the film apart from so much else is how seriously it takes both its beauty and its fear at the very same time. Bluth flatly refused to talk down to children, handing them stunning, detailed animation and genuine earned scares in equal generous measure. The final result is a film that feels weighty, artful, and important, and also one that quietly handed a great many kids their very first true nightmare about an owl in the dark. The Secret of Nymphs set the entire template for the darker, braver animated films that would follow it all through the rest of the decade. Its deep shadows, its real stakes, and its clear willingness to frighten its audience opened a door, and several of the films sitting further up this very list walked right on through it. This entry haunts with shadow, cruel science, and a giant owl waiting in the dark. The next one drags its horror straight out of the tomb entirely and without shame. It gives a beloved action-adventure show a main villain who is already a rotting, bandaged corpse, and who transforms again and again, week after week, into a towering monster of pure and hungry evil. Thundercats, 1985 to 1989. This beloved action-adventure series makes the countdown thanks to a main villain who was quite literally a walking, chanting corpse. Thundercats followed a band of heroic cat warriors on a distant world, but its true lasting legacy for many kids is the sheer terror of its central antagonist. The show handed children a rotting mummy who clawed his way back to life in every single episode, and that unnerving image never once left them. It fits this list squarely because of Mum-Ra. In his resting form, he is a shriveled, bandaged, wheezing mummy who slides in and out of a stone sarcophagus deep inside a shadowy black pyramid. Just the sight of that decayed, wrapped figure creaking slowly upright in the darkness was more than enough to unsettle young viewers, long before he ever actually began to move and scheme against the heroes of the show. Then comes his transformation, which is the true and lasting nightmare of the series. Mum-Ra calls out to dark ancient forces with a booming chant, crying to the ancient spirits of evil to transform his decayed form, and his frail, wrapped body suddenly swells and bulges into a towering, muscular super zombie. Watching a rotting corpse strain, bulge, and reshape itself into a hulking monster is genuine body horror. Aired every single week for an audience of children, the ritual itself is a big part of what made the whole thing stick so hard in young minds. The Black Pyramid darkens further, the chanting echoes and builds, 4 enormous looming spirit faces glare coldly down from the walls, and the mummy rises up through a burst of unholy crackling power. The scene is heavy with dread and grim repetition, so children always knew exactly what was coming and still could not manage to look away. That eerie mix of solemn ceremony and monstrous physical change is deeply, lastingly unsettling. The horror of Thundercats did not begin and end with its rotting main villain either. Certain darker episodes pushed hard into genuine psychological terror, including one where the heroes eat a strange mind-altering fruit that causes vivid hallucinations and terrifying visions of falling to their deaths. The show deliberately blurred the line between what was real and what was not, trapping its characters in waking nightmares where they could no longer trust their own eyes or minds. Those hallucination scenes hit a very different and deeper nerve than the monsters ever did. They played directly on the fear of losing control of your own mind, of suddenly seeing things that are not really there, of a simple, pleasant treat quietly turning into a deadly trap. For a children's action cartoon selling toys, that clear willingness to explore delusion, addiction, and mental horror was strikingly bold and genuinely disturbing to sit through. What ultimately gave Mum-Ra his lasting power over young imaginations was the show's sheer, total commitment to his decay. The series never once made him cute, funny, or safe to soften the blow. He was a rotting corpse who openly worshipped evil, dwelled alone in a dark tomb, and became a hulking monster on command whenever he pleased. Every single element of his design was pulled straight from the imagery of graveyards and nightmares, and children absorbed and remembered all of it completely. Thundercats quietly proved that a fun, colorful toy line and a heroic weekly adventure could still be built around one of the most genuinely frightening villains of the entire decade. Behind every single action figure sold in stores, there was a rotting mummy waiting in a black pyramid, ready to rise up again and haunt one more child's bedtime. This entry terrifies with a rotting corpse that simply will not stay dead. The next one commits an act so shocking that it feels almost forbidden to show a child at all. It takes a lovable, harmless cartoon character, an innocent little toon, and it destroys him right there on screen, slowly, in a hissing vat of acid, while he cries out helplessly for mercy that never comes. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? 1988. This film makes the list for showing children something no cartoon was ever supposed to show them: the deliberate, on-screen death of a living cartoon character. It cleverly blends live action and animation into a fun, fast detective story. And then it slowly reveals a villain whose entire evil plot is built around the deliberate murder of innocent toons. That single dark wrong idea is exactly what quietly haunts people who saw it to this very day. It fits this countdown squarely because of the Dip and Judge Doom. Doom is the film's cold, towering villain, and he has personally invented a way to permanently kill cartoons. Using a vat of hissing acid he calmly calls the Dip. Early in the film, he demonstrates his invention in a scene so genuinely cruel that it stunned an entire generation of children, slowly dissolving a small innocent cartoon shoe as it squeaks and trembles in fear. The shoe scene is very short, but it is absolutely devastating to sit through as a child. A cute little cartoon shoe hops right up to Doom trustingly, like a friendly puppy greeting its owner, and he lowers it slowly into the acid without a single flicker of feeling crossing his face. It squeals, thrashes, and melts away into nothing, and the film deliberately forces the audience to watch every second of it, quietly teaching that this villain kills the pure and the innocent without any mercy at all. That one short moment completely reframes the entire rest of the movie for a watching child. Suddenly, the bright, silly, familiar cartoon characters are not safe or invincible at all. They can be truly killed, erased forever, dissolved into nothing by a calm man who feels absolutely nothing while he does it. The lovable toons a child had been laughing along with become potential victims, and the whole film takes on a genuine shadow of real dread beneath its bright comedy. The horror deepens even further when Judge Doom's own hidden secret is finally revealed near the very end of the film. The story pulls back the curtain on who and what he truly is underneath, delivering a twist so genuinely unsettling that it counts among the most frightening reveals in any family film of the entire decade. His true form and warped, screeching voice push the whole film straight over the edge into pure nightmare territory. The entire plot ultimately rests on the idea of a planned genocide against cartoons, a cold scheme to wipe out a whole town full of colorful, harmless, living characters. That deeply grim concept, an entire population marked quietly for total destruction, sits right at the dark heart of what otherwise looks like a breezy, fun adventure. It gives the film a real heavy weight that its cheerful, jazzy surface never quite prepares a child to feel. What makes the film so brutally effective is that it carefully earns your affection for the toons. Long before it ever threatens to hurt them, you laugh along with them, root hard for them, grow to love them, and only then learn that they can be melted into nothing at any moment. That genuine emotional bond is exactly what makes their sudden danger feel so real, and it is precisely why that acid vat became such a lasting and specific source of childhood fear. Who Framed Roger Rabbit dared to make cartoons themselves mortal and killable, and in doing exactly that, it quietly broke an unspoken promise every child held, that animated characters are always safe no matter what. The unforgettable image of that little shoe slowly dissolving stayed lodged in viewers' minds, precisely because it shattered the one comforting rule they had always believed could never be broken. This entry horrifies by making a beloved cartoon truly and permanently die. The next one refuses to hide its death behind a shoe or a distant stranger at all. It takes its own lovable central hero, a charming dog the whole audience adores and roots for, and has him murdered in cold blood by his closest friend, then sends him off on a frightening tour of the afterlife itself. All dogs go to heaven. 1989. This film earns its high spot by handing children heavy adult ideas about death, betrayal, and damnation, all of it wrapped carefully around a charming, scheming dog. It looks at first glance like a fun animated musical full of songs, but underneath that surface, it is a raw, serious story about murder and the afterlife. It introduced a whole generation of kids to death and hell in a startlingly direct and unflinching way, and it never once softened the blow for them. It fits this countdown squarely because of what happens to its own central hero. Charlie is a lovable, roguish, scheming dog the audience quickly grows to genuinely love, and then his supposed best friend, driven purely by cold greed, has him deliberately murdered. The betrayal is calm, cruel, and completely deliberate, quietly teaching a watching child that even a trusted best friend can suddenly turn deadly. A genuinely dark and unsettling lesson for a bright family film. From that shocking moment onward, the film dives headfirst into the afterlife itself, showing heaven and hell as real concrete places with real unbending rules. Charlie experiences both of them directly, and the film pointedly refuses to treat these ideas as gentle, comforting metaphors. It presents death, judgment, and eternity as solid, undeniable facts of the world, forcing its young viewers to genuinely grapple with the enormous questions that most cartoons very carefully step around. The single most disturbing sequence in the film is Charlie's vivid nightmare vision of hell. The film suddenly plunges down into a fiery, screaming underworld full of leering demons and endless torment, a churning place of red flame and monstrous, reaching shapes that grab and claw for him. For a child who came in expecting a cute, fun dog movie, this sudden glimpse of a personal, waiting hell is genuinely horrifying, and it arrives with no warning and no real comfort afterward. The film also fills its shadowy world with grown-up vices that felt genuinely shocking to see in a children's cartoon at the time. There is heavy gambling, there is open drinking, and there is a whole criminal underworld of dogs running rigged bets, kidnappings, and violent schemes in the dark. It painted a seedy, dangerous adult world in real detail, and then simply let children sit and watch it all unfold, treating them as old enough and tough enough to see every bit of it. There is even a genuine kidnapping sitting right at the heart of the plot, involving a lonely little orphan girl caught up in all the surrounding danger. The story piles real, believable threats onto a small, vulnerable child character, deepening the constant sense of peril hanging over everything. The film never once lets its darkness feel like a harmless joke, keeping the stakes heavy, the danger sincere, and the fear real all the way through. What genuinely makes it linger in the memory for so long is its stark bluntness about mortality itself. It states plainly and directly that its beloved hero has died, then goes on to explore in real detail what comes after, with an unusual and unsettling seriousness. It flatly refuses to shield children from the raw idea of death, and it lets the full weight of that idea settle heavily over the whole story, giving the bright musical a strange, cold, heavy heart underneath its songs. All Dogs Go to Heaven quietly proved that a bright, tuneful cartoon musical could be built almost entirely around murder, hell, and the deep fear of dying, and still be packaged and sold straight to kids. Its cheerful songs and colorful animation only made the genuine darkness waiting underneath more startling and more memorable when it finally rose up to the surface. This entry disturbs by dragging a beloved hero straight through death and damnation. The next one delivers a death that landed on millions of children all at the very same time, in packed theaters across the world, as a great and noble hero fell in battle before their eyes, and then rose again as a hollow, shambling, wandering corpse. Transformers, the movie, 1986. This film and its single darkest episode rank among the most devastating on this list by daring to do the completely unthinkable, killing off an entire generation's heroes on the biggest possible stage. The animated Transformers movie was released to a huge fan base of children who genuinely worshipped these robot characters, and it then proceeded to slaughter a huge number of them right there on screen. The sheer scale of the mass death shocked and blindsided an entire audience all at once. It fits this countdown for one particular death that stands high above all the others. Optimus Prime, the noble, steady leader every single child in the theater looked up to, is gravely wounded in a climactic battle and then dies on screen in a scene of shocking, complete finality. For countless kids sitting in the dark, watching their greatest and most trusted hero fade slowly away and go completely still. Was their very first real encounter with the death of someone they truly loved. The film pointedly did not treat this death as a cheap fake-out or a quick, easy reset button. Optimus grows visibly gray and lifeless, his glowing eyes flickering and going dark, and the story deliberately lets him truly and permanently pass away. Parents at the time widely reported children openly crying in their theater seats, blindsided and betrayed that a movie built to sell toys would dare to take their beloved hero and simply quietly end him for good without mercy or reversal. The movie stacks death upon death on top of that central loss, wiping out beloved, familiar characters in rapid, brutal succession during its opening battle scenes. It felt to many kids far less like a fun adventure and much more like a cold massacre of familiar, trusted friends. The sheer staggering scale of the loss, so many cherished figures gone so quickly and so casually, completely overwhelmed young viewers who had come in simply expecting an exciting robot fight. As if the movie itself were not enough of a shock, the TV series went on to deliver its own separate nightmare in a later episode about a reawakened Optimus Prime. In that grim story, the fallen, mourned hero is brought back not as his noble self at all, but as a hollow, empty zombie-like husk, a shambling walking corpse of the very leader children had already grieved over once before in the theater. That single episode features an image that few who saw it as children have ever truly managed to forget. The reanimated Prime wanders slowly through a grim, silent resting place lined on all sides with the lifeless, broken bodies of other fallen robots. A genuine mausoleum of dead heroes. Seeing the beloved, trusted leader turned into a shambling, mindless shell, drifting quietly past his own dead comrades, took the raw trauma of his death and cruelly twisted the knife all over again. What made all of this cut so incredibly deep was the sheer strength of the bond children genuinely felt with these particular characters. These were not disposable, forgettable background extras to them. They were the heroes printed on every lunchbox, bedsheet, and backpack, and the story chose to kill them, mourn them, and then desecrate their memory by raising one back up as a shambling corpse. The deep betrayal of all that childhood love is exactly what cut so painfully far. Transformers took a cheerful, colorful toy franchise and calmly used it to teach a generation of children about sudden, permanent, irreversible death on an enormous and public scale. It quietly proved that no character anywhere was ever truly safe, not even the single greatest and most beloved hero of them all, and it left a whole generation quietly and permanently changed by the loss. This entry devastates with the very public, very final death of a beloved hero. The next one delivers a death that is even more intimate, quiet, and universal. The one specific loss that no child anywhere is ever truly ready to face. It takes a young dinosaur's gentle mother and tears her away forever, in a single scene that became the defining, unforgettable heartbreak of the entire decade. The Land Before Time, 1988. This film sits near the very top of this list because it contains what may well be the single most cited traumatic scene in the entire childhood trauma canon. It follows a young dinosaur named Littlefoot through a harsh, dying, changing world, and near the very start, it delivers a loss so deep and profound that it came to define the very idea of heartbreak for an entire generation of children. Almost everyone who saw it as a child remembers exactly where they were. It fits this countdown for the death of Littlefoot's mother, plain and simple. When a fearsome predator called Sharptooth attacks during a violent, ground-splitting earthquake, his mother throws herself into the fight to protect her son from the beast, and in doing so, she is mortally wounded and dies of her injuries. She lingers just long enough to gently comfort her frightened son one final time before she is gone forever, and the film quietly makes the watching child witness every single moment of it. The scene is almost unbearable to sit through precisely because of how gently and quietly it is all played out. There is no monster present in this part at all, only a small dinosaur softly nuzzling his dying mother, not fully understanding yet that she is truly leaving him behind forever. The film deliberately lets the loss unfold slowly and quietly, so that a child feels the full crushing weight of it, the confusion, the grief, and the terrible final permanence of death. What follows that quiet death is almost as painful for a young viewer as the loss itself. Littlefoot is left alone and openly grieving in a barren, colorless land, calling out again and again for a mother who will never answer him. The film sits right down inside his raw sorrow, showing a small child figure wandering, lost, and heartbroken, slowly learning to survive without the one who had always kept him safe. That long, aching stretch of grief is its own distinct kind of trauma. The film surrounds this central loss with genuine, constant danger and dread on every side. Sharptooth is a truly frightening predator, a towering, relentless set of teeth and fury that hunts the young heroes across the entire film without stopping. The sheer threat of being caught and eaten hangs heavy over the whole story, and the earthquake that violently splits the land apart adds a deep, unsettling sense that the very ground beneath a child's feet is no longer solid or safe. Running quietly beneath all of the peril is a heavy, aching theme of separation, as the young dinosaurs are scattered far from their families and must somehow find their own way through a world that has suddenly lost all of its color and comfort. The film is painfully honest about just how frightening and lonely the whole world can become when the people who protect and love you are suddenly and permanently gone, and it never once rushes in to fix that awful feeling quickly. What gives the film its lasting staying power is its refusal to ever soften or take back the central blow. So many other stories would find a way to bring the mother back, or to explain the loss away with a comforting twist. This one does not. It lets her stay gone, and it trusts children to carry that grief alongside Littlefoot for the rest of the film, which is exactly why the scene has stayed lodged with viewers for their entire lives. The Land Before Time became the single definitive example of just how deeply a gentle cartoon could wound a child, using a mother's quiet death to introduce millions of kids to real grief for the first time. Gentle, beautiful, warm, and utterly heartbreaking all at once. It fully earned its place near the very top of this entire list through pure, unmatched emotional devastation. This entry breaks hearts wide open with the quiet loss of a mother. The final entry somehow combines nearly every single fear on this whole list: undead armies, a lich-like sorcerer, and a hero's self-sacrifice, into one film so genuinely frightening that its own studio panicked, cut it apart in fear, and then tried to quietly bury it somewhere. No child would ever manage to find it again. The Black Cauldron, 1985. At the very top of this list sits the film widely regarded as the single darkest and most frightening animated movie the Disney studio ever made. It is a grim, shadowy fantasy about an evil king searching for a cursed cauldron, and it abandons nearly every warm comfort of a normal Disney film along the way, from its dim, gloomy look to its rising undead armies. It was built from the ground up to unnerve, and it succeeded far beyond anything its makers ever intended. It earns the crown of this list because it manages to combine so many separate childhood fears into a single, overwhelming film. Its central villain is the Horned King, a lich-like undead sorcerer with rotting flesh, glowing green eyes, and a bare skull for a face. He is not a charming schemer or a comic relief threat in any way. He is a walking corpse of pure, patient evil, and he wants nothing less than to conquer the entire living world with a marching army of the dead at his back. That undead army is the film's single most terrifying weapon, and its darkest image. Using the power of the cursed cauldron, the Horned King raises the Cauldron Born, an unstoppable, mindless horde of skeletal undead warriors that claw and drag their way up out of the cold earth to serve him without question. Watching a whole army of rotting skeletons rise and begin to march in a Disney film shattered every single expectation children had about what this beloved, trusted studio would ever dare to show them. The film's tone is unlike anything the studio had attempted before it. It is dim, moody, and heavy with dread, filled with dark stone castles, creeping fog, and an ever-present feeling of looming doom. There is almost none of the warmth, humor, or safety a child expects from a Disney film. Instead, the movie immerses its young viewers in a bleak, hostile world, where evil feels genuinely powerful and final victory feels far from certain. The story also delivers a genuinely devastating act of self-sacrifice near its climax. A small, loyal, gentle creature named Gurgi, one of the very few kind and warm souls in the entire film, throws himself willingly into the deadly churning cauldron to stop the undead army, giving up his own life to save everyone else around him. The film lets that loss land with real heavy weight, quietly teaching a child that true heroism can sometimes mean death, and letting them fully feel that sharp grief. The greatest proof of the film's raw power lies in what happened behind the scenes, and this is the secret the intro promised to reveal. The movie was made so frightening that it became the first Disney animated film to receive a PG rating, a mark that warned parents the content was too intense and too dark for the youngest children. The studio had accidentally crafted something deeply disturbing. According to the story that has trailed the film for decades, test screenings for children reportedly went so badly that the movie had to be cut down before release, with some of its most horrifying footage removed because it scared the young audiences far too much. The studio then all but buried the finished film, treating it as a costly embarrassment, and its failure is remembered even now as a blow that nearly ended Disney's animation studio for good. That is the revelation this countdown was built around from the very first line. The most traumatizing cartoon of the whole decade was not hidden away in some obscure, forgotten corner of the world. It came instead from the most trusted name in family entertainment, and that studio was so shaken by the thing it had created that it edited the film in a panic and hid it away, hoping the world would simply forget it existed. The Black Cauldron stands as the ultimate example of 80s animation gone dark, a film with a skull-faced sorcerer, an army of the dead, and a hero's sacrifice, so frightening that even the people who made it recoiled from their own work. If you made it all the way to the very end, you now know the one cartoon that scared an entire studio into hiding. So tell us in the comments which of these 20 left the deepest scar on you.